how is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
Unlike iconic sonorities like the Tristan chord, the so-called Chopin chord is pretty much a standard device of the entire Romantic era that by all means was not exclusively used by Chopin and actually can be seen in countless cadences of 19th century composers, be it Schubert or Liszt, not to mention Scriabin. But what those two chords have in common is that both of them are being defined by a special voicing that lends the sonority an individual, recognizable and thus distinctive shape. To generate the Chopin chord, I take this basic dominant 7th aggregate, which consists of root, 7th and 3rd in this very constellation. It becomes the Chopin chord by putting the interval of the 6th on top, which creates the typical spaced voicing with the secondary 7th in the right hand. That's producing the juicy sound. The textbook resolution usually looks like this. You can as well resolve by leap. There is no need to prepare the 6th, you can just jump right in, for example like this. If you want to get this device in your hands, I propose the following exercises that I order in 3 levels of technical and musical demand. All materials you're about to see are available on my Patreon site, and if you like what you see, consider a subscription as I regularly upload all kinds of materials surrounding different topics of improvisation and composition in historical styles. First of all, it's necessary to develop a haptical feeling for this chord, and the first step would be to gain the ability to catch and resolve the chord in major and minor keys that share the same accidentals. And then go for 3rd related chains. It becomes a more demanding exercise when you go for non-diatonic medians with major keys. The only element that links those keys together is that common tone on top. As those keys lie further apart from each other, it'll take your brain a little longer to process this step, which makes this one a most healthy exercise. A second step includes idiomatic textures. This kind of cadences and exercises can be animated with patterns, for example simply with a left-hand accompaniment. And then I would impose these patterns on the compound exercises. You can of course invent other patterns that express the Chopin dominant. This is an example of a typical waltz style cadence. But for this video, I want to stick to this kind of texture, and for that one I'm going to show an advanced exercise that includes a popular romantic modulation pattern that moves along a circle of major thirds. And I guess I gotta provide a preliminary exercise just based on chords that I will explain in a minute. The whole thing sounds like this. As pre-exercise, I would just begin with the chords of the cadence, and as you can see here, I prolonged that cadence via the cadential 6-4. If you're able to play this in all major keys, try to connect the keys via modulation, and that modulation works like this. The local tonic itself can most easily be transformed into a common pre-cadential chord that leads to the upper median. Theory textbooks usually refer to it as augmented 6/5 chord, or as well as German 6th chord. Concerning chord grammar, it is important to relate a chord to the scale degree it usually occurs on. So in case you're targeting a major key, this is the flat 6. Commonly, this chord resolves into a cadential 6/4 that lies a half step below and thus directly creates a link to the E major cadence. So that thing works a little bit like a wormhole. When you repeat the strategy now on E major, this will lead you to A flat major, so there is enharmonic spelling involved. So better just stare at the keys. And now it's getting a little sweaty, as I'm trying to raise the complexity by giving the cadence more context, and I will modify that Chopin dominant chord a little bit. It's probably wise to reduce this as well into the sheer chordal scaffolding. And maybe let's start with the actual cadence. Here I'm approaching the 5th from the lower chromatic neighbor, and thus the 5th serves as passing tone to the Chopin 6th that subsequently drops onto the 9th that's decorating the tonic. To get a little more action into the left hand, I include neighbor tones that surround the keys of the minor triad in the arpeggio, and that's the kind of thing you gotta go for when you want to sound like the goats. The pre-cadential area includes a Neapolitan chord as predominant. That's as well decorated with a 9th. The phrase opening is basically provided by a common twofold progression that I conceive as a rule of the octave module that I used as pendulum in the following recording, where I tried to connect several minor keys in the order of ascending fifths. The recording is more like a meditation on the shown cadence and actually turned out to be a pretty dark and gloomy piece of music. Bis nach Gismol, Bruder, was los bei dir? Da können die Bres mal so richtig Auge drauf machen, ich schwöre.